My grandson asked me the question during Sunday dinner. We were sitting around Laura's kitchen table eating pot roast while rain tapped softly against the windows. Normal evening, normal conversation. At least that was what I believed until Ethan looked up from his mashed potatoes and asked quietly, "Grandma, why do you keep forgetting people lately?" The room went completely silent. Not gradually, instantly. Forks paused, glasses stopped moving. Even Laura's breathing seemed to catch. I stared at Ethan in confusion. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He looked nervous immediately. The kind of nervous children become when they realize they accidentally said something important adults wanted hidden. "You know," he whispered. "Mom said sometimes you don't remember people anymore." Cold spread slowly through my chest. I looked toward Laura. She would not meet my eyes. "What exactly did you tell him?" Laura forced a small smile instantly. Ethan misunderstood. No, he didn't. Children misunderstand complicated explanations. They do not invent them from nowhere. Ethan lowered his voice further. "You forgot Uncle Daniel at the grocery store." I blinked, then immediately remembered the moment. 3 weeks earlier, I saw Daniel unexpectedly at the supermarket while distracted looking for coffee filters. I accidentally called him Richard for 1 second. Richard, my dead husband. Not because I forgot my son, because grief still moves strangely through the mind sometimes. I corrected myself immediately. Daniel laughed about it at the time, or at least I thought he did. Now my stomach tightened painfully. Laura finally spoke carefully. It worried the kids a little. Worried. Another harmless word slowly becoming poisonous. I stared around the table. Daniel sat quietly near the window, avoiding eye contact completely. His wife Megan looked deeply uncomfortable. Only Ethan still seemed genuinely confused. "I know who Daniel is," I said softly. "Of course," Laura answered quickly. Too quickly. Pacifying again. I knew that tone now. The careful voice people use once they start treating ordinary emotion like instability. I looked back at Ethan gently. "Grandma hasn't forgotten anyone," he nodded uncertainly. "But Mom said memory problems can start small." There it was, memory problems, not grief, not distraction. Problems. I suddenly realized my children had been discussing me in front of the grandchildren. Not directly perhaps, but enough. Enough for Ethan to start watching me too. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger, fear. Because once children begin looking at older relatives through the lens of decline, every normal human mistake starts becoming suspicious. Dinner continued afterward, but the atmosphere never recovered. Every time I paused speaking, I felt eyes on me, measuring, evaluating. At one point, I forgot the name of a restaurant Susan and I visited recently. Laura supplied it immediately before I could remember. Not rudely, carefully, like helping a patient. The gesture humiliated me so deeply, I nearly left the table right then. Later that evening, while helping clear dishes, I finally asked quietly, "How long have you been telling people I'm forgetting things?" Laura froze beside the sink. "Nobody saying that. Ethan didn't invent it." She dried her hands slowly on a towel. "We've just been discussing concerns. Concerns, always concerns, never accusations, never proof. Just enough uncertainty to change how everyone sees you." "What concerns?" Laura hesitated. Then softly, "You called Daniel by Dad's name. One time, you repeated the same story twice at Easter. I repeated myself. Mom," there it was, that tone again, gentle, patient, terrifying. As though she already believed resistance itself was evidence, I lowered my voice carefully. "Do you think I don't recognize my own children?" No one said that. No. They never needed to say things directly anymore. The implication did all the work quietly. I drove home afterward with the radio off and my chest tight with something I could not fully name. Not confusion, violation, because suddenly I understood something terrible. My children had started translating ordinary human moments into symptoms. Grief became memory loss. Distraction became confusion. Emotion became instability. And once those interpretations begin repeating inside families, they spread frighteningly fast. When I reached home, I stood in the hallway staring at the framed family photographs near the staircase. Laura at 16, Daniel in his graduation suit, Richard holding Ethan as a baby. My entire life arranged across the walls. I knew every face instantly, every birthday, every vacation, every argument. I had forgotten nothing. Yet suddenly I felt afraid of making even one mistake in front of anyone again. That was the real damage. Not losing memory. Losing the right to be imperfect without becoming suspicious. The next morning, Susan called. The moment she heard my voice, she asked, "What happened?" I almost laughed. "Why, you sound different." Interesting, even that frightened me now. Different. I told her everything about dinner, about Ethan, about the careful voices. Susan went completely silent for several seconds, then softly, "Oh no," not disbelief, recognition. "You think I'm overreacting?" "No," she said immediately, then more quietly, "I think they've started building a narrative." Narrative, exactly, not one accusation. Many tiny observations slowly arranged together until they begin sounding like truth. I sat down at the kitchen table. "They told Ethan I'm forgetting people." Susan sounded furious now. "That is unbelievably irresponsible." Irresponsible. Finally, not concern, not caution. Irresponsible. I closed my eyes briefly. The worst part is I'm starting to question myself. The silence on the phone deepened instantly. "What do you mean?" "I keep replaying conversations now." I stared toward the living room quietly. Every time I forget a word or lose my train of thought for a second, I wonder if they're right. There it was, the most terrifying part of all. Once enough people begin watching older adults for signs of decline, eventually, the older adults begin watching themselves the same way. After my conversation with Susan, I started noticing things I wish I never noticed at all. Little pauses, tiny glances, the careful way Laura corrected me now whenever I mixed up dates or names. Not cruelly, softly. That somehow made it worse. Cruelty can be confronted. Gentle concern spreads quietly until you begin doubting yourself alongside everyone else. 3 days after Sunday dinner, Laura stopped by unexpectedly with groceries. "I figured you probably forgot to shop this week." The sentence hit harder than she realized. Because I had already gone shopping. The receipt still sat on the counter beside the coffee maker. I stared at the bags in her hands. "I already bought groceries," Laura blinked. "Oh, not surprise." Adjustment, like she was reorganizing expectations inside her head. "I just wanted to help. Help, always help." I watched while she unpacked things into my refrigerator. Milk, soup, frozen meals. Then she paused beside the calendar hanging near the stove. "You forgot your dentist appointment yesterday." My stomach tightened immediately. "I moved it to next week." "Oh," again that tiny word. Not apology, not relief, recalculation. She looked embarrassed for a moment, then quickly smiled. "That's good." Good, like successful task completion deserved encouragement now. I suddenly realized something horrifying. My daughter had begun approaching every interaction already expecting evidence of decline. When she failed to find it, she seemed momentarily disoriented herself. Later that afternoon, while Laura folded laundry in the living room despite me repeatedly telling her it wasn't necessary, she casually asked, "Have you had any more moments where you confuse people?" Moments. Such careful language, I looked up slowly. "You mean calling Daniel by his father's name once? It worried us." Us again, always us. Collective concern always sounds more legitimate than individual fear. Richard was his father. "I know. You've never accidentally called Ethan by Daniel's name," Laura hesitated. "That's different." "No, it was. That was the frightening part. Young people confuse names and laugh. Older people confuse names and families start documenting patterns." I folded a towel slowly. "What exactly have you told the children?" Laura's face changed immediately. "Nothing bad. That isn't an answer." She sat down carefully across from me. "We just explained that memory changes can happen as people get older." Memory changes. Again, not aging, not grief, changes. As though it's already happening to me. "We're trying to prepare them gently." Prepare them. The sentence chilled me instantly. "For what?" Silence. Then softly, in case things progress. Progress, always the future. Never my actual present reality sitting directly in front of them. I stared at my daughter carefully. You already think I'm disappearing. Laura's eyes filled immediately. No, but the hesitation before the word told the truth anyway. That evening after she left, I found myself standing in the hallway trying to remember why I walked there. For one terrible second, panic flashed through me, not because I forgot momentarily. Because suddenly forgetting anything felt dangerous. Then I remembered. I came for my reading glasses. Ordinary, human, yet my heart still took several minutes to calm down afterward. Fear changes the body quickly. The next Sunday, Daniel invited me to Ethan's soccer game. At first, everything felt normal. Parents cheering, children running through wet grass. Cold wind carrying the smell of coffee and rain. Then midway through the game, Ethan scored a goal. Without thinking, I stood up too quickly and shouted, "That's my boy!" Several parents laughed warmly. Normal moment. Then Laura leaned toward another mother nearby and whispered something quietly. The woman glanced toward me with immediate sympathy. Sympathy, not amusement, not warmth. Sympathy, my chest tightened painfully. Later, while everyone gathered near the parking lot afterward, Ethan asked me, "Grandma, do you remember my coach's name yet?" The question sounded innocent, but the silence surrounding it was not. I looked toward Laura immediately. She froze. "Ethan, no," I interrupted softly. "Let him answer honestly." Ethan looked confused again. "You said Grandma keeps forgetting people's names." There it was, simple, direct, devastating. Laura looked horrified now, not because he lied, because he repeated the truth too clearly. The other parents suddenly became deeply interested in loading sports equipment into cars. No one looked directly at me anymore. That hurt more than anything else. Not accusation, social adjustment. The subtle shift that happens once people begin quietly questioning an older person's mind. I drove home alone afterward. Halfway there, I pulled into a pharmacy parking lot because my hands would not stop shaking. Not from confusion, humiliation. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes replaying every interaction from the past month. Every careful smile, every correction, every helpful reminder. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. 3 weeks earlier, Laura asking for copies of my medication list in case of emergencies. At the time, I gave them without hesitation. Now I wondered where else those papers existed. Who else had heard concerns about my memory? The next morning, I called Ethan's school directly, not because I blamed him, because I needed to know how far this had spread. After several awkward transfers, the guidance counselor finally spoke with me privately, and within 5 minutes, my stomach turned cold. Laura had requested family support awareness for Ethan regarding concerns about his grandmother's cognitive decline. Cognitive decline, officially, at school. I sat silently gripping the phone while the counselor spoke gently about helping children process changes in elderly relatives. Changes. Again, not possibility, reality already assumed. When I hung up, I stared at the kitchen wall for a very long time. My daughter had not only changed how the family saw me. She had started teaching my grandchildren and their school community to expect my disappearance too. That afternoon, I drove directly to Laura's house. Not emotional, not impulsive, necessary. When she opened the door, I held up the printed school communication in silence. The blood drained from her face immediately. "Mom, you told Ethan's school I have cognitive decline." She started crying instantly, real crying, ashamed crying. "We were trying to prepare him emotionally." Emotionally. As though my decline already existed as certainty, I stepped inside slowly. "Do you understand what you're doing to me? We're scared." "No," I whispered. "You're building a future where everyone sees me as unreliable before anything has even happened." Laura covered her face with both hands. "We thought acting early was safer." Safer. That word again. I looked around her living room quietly. Family photographs lined the walls. Children's drawings taped near the refrigerator. Then I realized something terrifying. My daughter had become so afraid of losing me someday that she already started teaching her children to expect me to disappear now. Laura cried for nearly 10 minutes that afternoon. Not loudly. Quietly, exhaustedly. The kind of crying that comes from carrying fear too long. I sat across from her in silence while sunlight faded slowly through the living room curtains. Finally, she whispered, "You think I'm trying to hurt you?" I looked at my daughter carefully. No, and that was the tragedy. If she were cruel, this would have been simpler. But Laura genuinely believed she was protecting everyone from future pain. That belief had slowly transformed her love into surveillance. "I watched Grandpa disappear," she said softly, "not Richard." My father, Alzheimer's. I suddenly remembered sitting beside Laura in the nursing home when she was 14 while my father stared through us without recognition. Fear leaves roots behind, deep ones. "You were a child," I whispered. "He forgot your name." The room went silent, because that was true. My father forgot everyone eventually. And apparently part of Laura never emotionally escaped that terror. "I promised myself I'd notice signs early someday," she whispered. There it was. The origin, not greed, not malice, trauma. I suddenly saw my daughter clearly again. Not manipulative. Terrified. Terrified of repeating history. Terrified of guilt. Terrified of missing symptoms, the way she believed everyone missed them with my father. And fear had slowly started rewriting ordinary reality around me. "You called Daniel by Dad's name," she said quietly. "One time. That's how it started with Grandpa." No, that was the dangerous part. Once fear begins searching for patterns, it starts forcing unrelated moments together. I leaned forward slowly. "Do you know how many times my mother accidentally mixed up names in her 70s? Laura hesitated. "That's different." "Why?" Silence. "Because deep down she no longer trusted her own ability to distinguish normal aging from catastrophe. Fear had blurred the line. That evening, Daniel arrived unexpectedly. Again. The family rotated around me carefully, now like people monitoring a situation, instead of visiting their mother. The moment he saw Laura crying, his expression tightened. "What happened?" She showed me the school forms. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Interesting, he already knew about them too. "How many people know?" I asked quietly. Neither answered immediately. That frightened me instantly. "How many?" Daniel rubbed his forehead tiredly. "Just close family. Ethan's school counselor." Silence. "Then, and your doctor." Cold spread slowly through my chest. "My doctor." Laura looked miserable now. "We only talked to her because we were worried." I stared at both of them. "You discussed my cognitive decline with my physician." "She's your doctor," Daniel whispered. "She needed context." Context. Such a harmless word hiding enormous consequences. I suddenly realized how dangerous this had become, not because of diagnosis, because of perception. Every institution surrounding my life was quietly being taught to question my reliability before I even walked through the door. I stood slowly. "I want copies of everything." Laura blinked. "What?" "Every message, every form, every conversation summary." Daniel immediately looked nervous. "Mom, no." For the first time in weeks, my voice sounded sharp enough to make both of them freeze. "You do not get to build a narrative around my life without me seeing it." The room stayed silent. Then Laura whispered, "We thought involving you directly would upset you." Upset. Again. Not violated, not humiliated, upset. As though emotional reaction itself proved instability, I laughed softly, brokenly. "Do you hear yourselves anymore?" Neither answered. Because somewhere deep down, they finally started hearing it too. The next morning, I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Patel, my physician for nearly 16 years. The moment I entered the office, I noticed the difference immediately. The receptionist spoke more slowly than usual. The nurse asked twice whether I needed help filling forms I had completed independently for years. Tiny things, subtle things, but once you notice the shift, you cannot stop noticing it. When Dr. Patel entered the examination room, her smile looked unusually careful too. That frightened me more than anything else. "Evelyn," she said warmly, "how have you been feeling lately?" Feeling. Not physically, broadly, cautiously, I sat very still. My children contacted you, she hesitated. They expressed some concerns. Concerns, always concerns, never evidence. I looked directly at her. Do you believe I have dementia? Silence. Then carefully. I think grief and aging can create complicated emotional and cognitive experiences. Cognitive experiences. Not yes, not no, professional ambiguity. Because once enough concern exists around older people, certainty becomes dangerous for institutions too. I folded my hands carefully. Did Laura tell you I called Daniel by Richard's name once? Dr. Patel nodded slowly. Yes. My husband has been dead 4 years. I understand. No, I whispered. I don't think anyone understands. The room stayed silent. Then I asked quietly, have you changed how you see me? That question seemed to genuinely affect her, not professionally, personally. She sat down more slowly afterward. Evelyn family reports influence physicians whether we want them to or not. There it was, the truth, not conspiracy, not malice, accumulation. Enough repeated concern slowly reshapes perception even inside good people. I suddenly felt unbearably tired. Not angry anymore, just tired, tired of careful voices. Tired of being interpreted constantly. Tired of feeling watched every time I forgot a word or paused mid-sentence. Then Dr. Patel said something that hollowed me completely. Would you consider a baseline cognitive assessment just for reassurance? Reassurance, not because evidence existed. Because enough doubt had already spread that now I needed to prove normality instead of simply living it. I stared at her for a very long time. Then quietly asked, do you know what the cruelest part of all this is? She remained silent. I'm starting to rehearse conversations in my head before speaking. The room went completely still. Because that was the real damage, not memory loss. Fear. Fear of making one ordinary human mistake in front of people already prepared to reinterpret it as evidence that you are slowly disappearing. I agreed to the cognitive assessment, not because I believed I needed it, because by then, refusing anything sounded dangerous. That was the trap. Once enough people begin questioning an older person's memory, cooperation starts looking sane, while resistance starts looking suspicious. The appointment was scheduled for the following Wednesday morning. Laura offered to drive me. I refused immediately, then spent the next hour wondering whether refusing seemed defensive. That frightened me more than the appointment itself. Fear had started reorganizing my behavior. Every choice suddenly carried implications. The morning of the evaluation, I drove myself. Halfway there, I missed the clinic entrance and had to circle the block once. My chest tightened instantly, not because missing a turn matters. Because suddenly every tiny mistake felt loaded with meaning. By the time I parked, my hands were trembling. The clinic waiting room looked painfully familiar. Soft lighting, muted colors. Careful smiles, places designed around cognitive decline all seemed to share the same atmosphere. Compassion mixed with quiet observation. A young receptionist handed me forms. Halfway through completing them, she smiled gently and asked, would you like help with any sections? I stared at her. No, too sharply. Immediately I worried that sounding irritated would seem unstable too. There it was again. The impossible balancing act, too emotional, too defensive, too calm, too rehearsed. Every version of yourself suddenly becomes questionable once decline enters the conversation. The neurologist's name was Dr. Hannah Weiss, mid-40s, professional, kind eyes. The kind of person you instinctively want to trust. That frightened me too. She greeted me warmly and led me into her office. I understand your family has noticed some memory concerns lately. Family has noticed. Not I have symptoms. Already the narrative sat between us before I even spoke. I folded my hands carefully. My family became frightened after I accidentally called my son by my late husband's name once. Dr. Weiss nodded thoughtfully. That can certainly happen during grief. Relief nearly made me dizzy. Finally, someone speaking normally. Then she added gently, though families sometimes recognize patterns patients themselves don't notice. There it was again. Patterns, always patterns. I suddenly realized fear speaks almost the same language everywhere. The evaluation lasted nearly 3 hours. Memory tests, word recall, problem solving, visual exercises. At one point, Dr. Weiss read me a list of unrelated words and asked me to repeat them later. Apple, train, blue, garden, mirror, simple. Yet I became so anxious about forgetting them that my mind nearly froze completely. That was the cruel irony. The fear of appearing cognitively impaired was actively making me perform worse. At another point, I forgot the word compass. For one horrible second, panic flashed through me. Dr. Weiss noticed immediately. "You're very tense." Of course I was tense. My entire family had spent months quietly teaching me that ordinary mistakes might mean I was disappearing. By the end of the assessment, I felt emotionally exhausted. Not because the tests were difficult, because I had never experienced anything more humiliating than proving my own mind deserved trust. As I gathered my purse to leave, Dr. Weiss spoke carefully. "Mrs. Carter, I'd like to discuss something honestly." My stomach tightened. "All right. You appear cognitively healthy overall." Overall, interesting word choice. "But," she smiled sadly, "you're experiencing significant anxiety surrounding memory." Anxiety, not dementia, not decline, fear. I sat very still. Then quietly asked, "What happens when families become convinced someone is declining before evidence exists?" Dr. Weiss leaned back slightly. "That happens more often than people realize." The room went silent. She continued carefully. "Families who have experienced dementia before sometimes become hypervigilant." Hypervigilant, exactly. They start interpreting ordinary aging behaviors through a pathological lens. Pathological lens? I nearly cried hearing someone finally describe the situation accurately. Doctor. Weiss folded her hands gently. "Once that process begins, confirmation bias can become very powerful." Confirmation bias, every forgotten word, every repeated story, every emotional moment. All gathered together until the narrative starts feeding itself. I whispered softly, "They told my grandchildren I was forgetting people." Dr. Weiss's expression changed immediately. Painfully human now instead of purely clinical. "I'm sorry." Not careful, not professional, sorry. That almost broke me completely. Before I left, she handed me a summary report. No evidence of dementia. No significant cognitive impairment. Stress-related anxiety regarding perceived memory decline. 3 simple conclusions. Yet I sat in my car afterward crying harder than I had in months, because the report did not erase what happened. My grandchildren still watched me differently now. My children still monitored my mistakes. And somewhere deep inside, part of me still feared forgetting things every single day. That evening, Laura came over after I emailed her the evaluation results. She looked relieved at first, then strangely uncertain. "Dr. Weiss says you're okay." Okay, not healthy, not normal, okay. I looked at my daughter carefully. "You sound disappointed." Her face crumpled instantly. "No," but the hesitation before the word hurt terribly, not because she wanted me sick. Because part of her had prepared emotionally for decline already. And suddenly reality no longer matched the future she spent months fearing. We sat together quietly in the kitchen. Then Laura whispered something that chilled me completely. "I don't know how to stop watching for signs now." There it was, the real damage, not the tests, not the school forms. Not even the humiliation. Fear had become habit. My daughter no longer knew how to simply see me normally again. And perhaps that is the cruelest thing fear does to families. It teaches people to monitor the ones they love instead of simply loving them while they are still here. For a while after the evaluation, everyone tried very hard to act normal again. That almost made things worse. Laura stopped correcting me constantly. Daniel stopped asking whether I remembered appointments. The careful voices softened. But once people begin scanning you for signs of decline, the habit does not disappear overnight. I could still feel it sometimes. Tiny pauses after I forgot a word. The brief glance between Laura and Daniel if I repeated a story accidentally. The way Ethan studied my face now whenever I hesitated during conversations. Not dramatically, quietly. Fear had settled into the family like invisible dust. 3 weeks later, Ethan spent the night at my house for the first time in months. Laura seemed nervous dropping him off. You have my number if you need anything. Need anything. Interesting. Not call if there's an emergency. Need anything. I almost asked whether she thought I might forget how to care for my own grandson. Instead, I simply smiled. We'll survive. That night, Ethan and I made grilled cheese sandwiches and watched old nature documentaries the way Richard used to with the children. For a few hours, everything felt normal again. Then sometime after 10, while we were playing cards at the kitchen table, Ethan suddenly asked quietly, "Grandma, were you scared?" The question caught me off guard. About what? That you were forgetting people. I looked at him carefully. Children understand more than adults think. Yes, I admitted softly. His eyes widened slightly. But you weren't forgetting. No. Then why were you scared? Because once enough people begin treating you like something may be wrong with your mind, part of you eventually starts listening. I searched for simpler words instead. Have you ever had everyone around you tell you something so often that you started wondering if maybe they were right? Ethan thought for a moment. Like when kids say a movie is scary and then you get scared too. I almost laughed. Yes, a little like that. He nodded slowly. Then quietly asked, "Were Mom and Uncle Daniel wrong?" The room went silent, not because I didn't know the answer. Because I suddenly realized how carefully children watch adults build reality around them. They were frightened, I said softly. That's different. And it was. That distinction mattered deeply to me. Laura and Daniel were not cruel people. Fear simply carried them somewhere dangerous, one careful step at a time. The next morning, while Ethan ate cereal in the kitchen, I accidentally dropped a glass trying to rinse it. It shattered across the sink and floor instantly. For one terrible second, Ethan froze. I saw it immediately. The calculation, the fear, not fear of the glass, fear of what the accident might mean. Then his shoulders relaxed. "You just dropped it." Such a simple sentence. Yet it nearly made me cry. Not, "Are you okay? Did you forget?" What happened? Just, you dropped it. Human, ordinary, normal. I suddenly realized how hungry I had become for normal interpretation again. Later that afternoon, Laura arrived to pick him up. The moment she stepped inside, Ethan immediately announced proudly, "Grandma remembered everything." The room went completely still. Laura looked horrified instantly, not at me, at herself, because suddenly she heard clearly what her fear had done to her son. He spent the entire night subconsciously monitoring whether his grandmother could still function normally. Laura crouched slowly beside him. "You don't have to test Grandma." I wasn't testing her, but he had been, not intentionally, conditioned. Laura's eyes filled immediately. After Ethan went outside to get his backpack from the car, she sat heavily at the kitchen table and covered her face briefly. "I did this to him. Not maliciously, not cruelly, but yes." Fear spread socially faster than almost anything else. I sat across from my daughter quietly, then softly asked the question that had haunted me for months. "When exactly did you stop trusting me more than your fear?" Laura started crying instantly. Real crying, exhausted crying. "I don't know." And somehow that answer hurt more than anything else. Because there was no villain here. No greed. No manipulation. No secret plan. Just fear left untreated for so long it slowly transformed love into suspicion. That evening, after they left, I walked slowly through the house, turning off lights room by room. The hallway photographs glowed softly in the darkness. Laura at 16, Daniel graduating college, Richard holding newborn Ethan. My life remained exactly where it always had been. Intact, recognizable, mine. Yet for months, everyone around me had looked at those same memories while quietly preparing themselves for my disappearance. The following Sunday, the entire family came over for dinner. For the first time in months, something felt different immediately. Lighter, not because fear vanished, because people finally started recognizing it. Halfway through dessert, Daniel accidentally called Megan by Laura's name. Everyone laughed instantly. Then the room suddenly went quiet. I watched realization spread across both my children's faces at the exact same moment. Normal mistake. Human mistake. Nothing more. Laura looked at me slowly across the table. Then whispered, "Oh my God." Not dramatic, not loud, but deeply ashamed. Because finally, after months of searching for signs everywhere, she saw the truth clearly for one brief perfect moment. Human beings confuse names, forget appointments, repeat stories, lose keys, get distracted. That is not disappearance, that is life. Later that night, after everyone left, Laura stayed behind helping me wash dishes. At one point, I forgot where I stored the larger serving bowls. For one split second, fear flashed across her face automatically. Then she stopped herself, breathed, and smiled sadly instead. "You've kept them in the wrong cabinet since 2008. I laughed so hard I nearly cried, because she remembered, not symptoms, not concerns, me, the real me. And perhaps that is the cruelest thing fear can take from families. Not trust, recognition. Sometimes people become so terrified of losing the ones they love someday, they slowly stop seeing who is still standing right in front of them now.